Friday morning, welcome to the programme Victoria Derbyshire on 5 Live. Men who have acted as known sperm donors may now win the right to be part of their biological child's life, even if they haven't helped to raise the child from the outset. A new ruling by the High Court's Family Division says a man who is legally a sperm donor and has no parental rights may be able to bring their case to court to ask for contact. Let's talk to Natalie Gamble, who is a leading fertility lawyer from Natalie Gamble Associates. We'll also hear from Natalie Drew, who's in a civil partnership and has 2 children with the help of a sperm donor, and also Christine Whipp, who was a sperm donor baby, who learned that her real father was a donor when she was in her 40s. Welcome to the programme, all of you. Natalie Gamble, let's begin with you. Explain to our listeners what this new ruling means.
Yeah, it's a ruling that's very important, but it's not quite going as far as some of the headlines are suggesting. So this is about an involved father in the sense that he is a known donor who has donated his sperm to a lesbian couple who are both the legal parents of the child. And the donor is applying for rights of contact in relation to the child, but the court first has to decide whether he's even able to argue his case in court. So the ruling yesterday was about whether his case should be heard, if you like. It's not yet given him any rights of contact. So it's important because it is to do with the law on donation and the protection that parents have where they're conceiving with egg or sperm donors, but it's not necessarily creating a rule that donors will have rights of contact.
Okay, so it's about them having an opportunity to have the right,
yes, and only
if they can argue their case.
Yeah.
And the certain circumstances are if the sperm donor is known.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the court said that in this case, that the reason why leave was given was principally because the 2 donors that were involved in the cases had had some degree of contact in the early months. So it's a very fact-specific decision. It's not about the kind of a general rule for donors more widely.
Okay. Why do you think they have gone this far when it comes to known sperm donors, though? What is the rationale?
Well, I mean, I think where you have known sperm donors, there is potentially always a spectrum of involvement that they may have. So you could have men who are very involved with a child but legally don't have any status, or equally you could have men that have donated their sperm and had very little involvement at all. And I think it's just about recognising that fluidity and that complexity, that there may be cases at different ends of the spectrum.
Okay. Is there any responsibility on the women involved and the known sperm donor to try and sort this out before the sperm is donated?
It's always a good idea, I think, with these arrangements to kind of go into things with your eyes open and to have very clear discussions to make sure that you have matched expectations. And we deal with lots of these kinds of cases, and it's very common for problems to arise because people haven't gone into things with a very clear understanding of what each of them wanted to get out of it. So, yeah, good planning at the beginning is always very important to avoid this kind of dispute from arising.
Who might be worried by this move?
Because of the way that the headlines have been spun, it has the potential of worrying a lot of people who are conceiving with donors, and I think it's important to stress that, for people who are conceiving through clinics and don't know who donors are, that this is a ruling of very limited effect, and even in this case, there's no certainty as yet that the donors will be given any rights of contact at all.
And it certainly doesn't mean that all sperm donors will have a right to be part of their biological children's lives.
No, not at all, not at all. The law is very, very clear in how it allocates parenthood where children are conceived through donation, and it explicitly gives parenthood to lesbian couples who conceive together who are civil partners, and also says that the donor is not the father for any purpose. So the law is very, very clear about the fact that parentage goes to the parents, the people who are caring for the child. So, any recognition that's there for donors is on the periphery of that.
Let's bring in Natalie Drew. Good morning, Natalie.
Good morning.
Tell our listeners about your own situation and how you found your donor.
We found our donor through a website 8 years ago now, and then we met up, obviously prior to conception, did a donor contract and all that sort of stuff because there wasn't civil partnerships then, and then we started trying for GIA and caught for GIA straight away, and then we've kept in regular contact through email and a visit yearly with the donor, and then obviously then we use the same donor for Kai.
Right. So Natalie Gamble, our lawyer here, in Natalie Drew's situation, the sperm donor initially was anonymous, then they got to know him. So is he a known donor or an anonymous sperm donor?
Well, this is also taking place under a different legal framework, because the new rules that are there to protect lesbian couples both being parents and being on the birth certificate only came into force in 2009. And Natalie, am I right in understanding your kids are a bit older than that?
They are, yeah. Kai's 4 and Gia's 7.
Okay, so in that situation the donor will be the legal father, so that has a very different context, if you like, to this kind of case where the donor is not to be treated as the father in the same way that a clinic donor would not be.
Right, so if the donor is the legal father, do they automatically have contact rights?
Yeah, they wouldn't then have to apply for
Sure.
this thing called leave, which is what this ruling was all about. They would automatically be able to ask for rights of contact. Again, nothing is certain as to whether they would get rights of contact.
Yeah.
That would be for the court to decide, but they would have the right to ask.
Okay. Let's bring in Christine then. Christine Whip was a sperm donor baby. Christine, good morning to you.
Good morning.
You were born as a result of your mother receiving donated sperm through a clinic. And tell us the circumstances of how you got to know the donor.
Well, I was 41 before I even found out that I was donor conceived.
Right.
And of course, back in the 1950s, all donors were completely anonymous and records were generally destroyed. But through my own research, I was able to pinpoint a number of men who might possibly have been my donor. But because so much time had elapsed, a lot of those people had actually died. But I was able to make contact with 2 sons of a man that I thought might have been my donor, and I talked them round after a good many years to doing a DNA sample with me and doing testing, and we discovered that in fact their father is my father too. But of course he died 20 years ago, so I never actually got the chance to meet him.
How did you discover at 41 that you were a sperm donor baby?
My mother eventually decided to tell me.
Right. What impact did that have on you?
Well, I'd always thought there was something not quite right, and I did wonder about my parentage, so in a way it put everything into place for me. It made me understand a lot of things that had seemed very complex and I hadn't been able to understand before.
Yes.
But of course the immediate thing was, when I found out that I had a father that I didn't know, was I wanted to know who he was. That became a very big part of my life, wanting to know who he was so that I could better understand who I am.
Of course. And as you were growing up, what had your mother told you about who your father was or where your father was?
Well, my mother was in a normal marriage at the time that she had me. And her
right.
husband
I didn't realise.
Yes, well, a normal traditional heterosexual family, and it was always assumed by everyone that I was the child of her husband. He was my daddy, as far as anyone knew, and indeed my birth certificate says that he's my father. So I grew up not having any way of finding out unless someone chose to tell me, and eventually I did find out.
And do you know, I mean, this may be too personal for you to answer, but do you know why your mother did it that way?
It was the only way they could have a baby. My
Right.
father was infertile, my social father was infertile, and he was quite a lot older than her, and he was very ill, so they would never have been considered for adoption. So it was really their last chance. It was their only chance of having a baby.
Right. What are your own views, having gone through your own experience of sperm donation, and indeed egg donation, if that's relevant?
Any form of donation. To be honest, I'm not in favour of any form of donation. I think it is far too complex a thing. There are too many things that make everything go wrong. Life is very complex for people who've been donor conceived. Life is complex for families who've had children through donation. There's a great deal of complex things happening, and it's difficult.
But that means you would never have been born.
That's true, but just because I'm born doesn't mean to say I have to promote the way in which I was
Not
conceived.
at all. Not
No.
at all. No, I'm not
No.
suggesting that. Sorry, go on. Who's that?
Since we opened our centre, we've helped over 700 women conceive children. That's gay and straight,
Is this?
which otherwise wouldn't have been possible. And these are, children that are, I don't know, that are having enriched, stable environments that they're growing up in. So I don't think it's right to just, say that any donor's it shouldn't be allowed anymore. It shouldn't be, it shouldn't go on, because otherwise you would have so many people that crave for children that wouldn't have them.
Christine?
Well, I don't think necessarily that craving for a child, you should be allowed to have one in an untraditional manner. I think life is very, very complex for everyone these days, and it is more difficult for children growing up in donor-conceived families. It's almost like being born into a family of divorce, where, there are complex currents and undercurrents happening all the time.
Yeah,
Also, I think another reason for not having donor conception is that we live in a world of finite resources, and I think overpopulation is a serious problem, and therefore I don't think we should be adding to it by deliberately creating babies.
Can I just say,
you've got to look at our situation where we've got, there's me and my partner, and obviously our children have contact with their donor, and so they've got three adults that are having an impact in their lives. So there's no sort of divorce situation going on there. You know, they've got the loving home with us, and then they've also got the benefit of having another parent that wants to have input as well. So they've got such a well-rounded family with a lot of different views. There's no sort of this situation where there are single parents out there that are bringing up children and there's been animosity with the father. We've never had that situation.
I appreciate that, Natalie, and I can understand that it's working well for you, but on a wider spread, it very often doesn't work well in a lot of other families. There tends to be an awful lot of what they call family transition and different things. And I'm particularly worried about in known donor families because I think where perhaps an auntie is a child's mother, I think it's liable to lead to all kinds of divided loyalties within a family. I think it will make it very difficult for children who are conceived in known donor situations. Although it's wonderful that the child is able to have a relationship with their biological parent that they otherwise wouldn't have, there is still an awful lot of problematic areas with it.
Natalie Gamble, you wanted to come back in, our lawyer.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that, thinking has changed a huge amount over the last decades about how we deal with donor conception and how we support parents and we support families to make sure that children aren't unsettled in any way by the fact of their conception. So there's much, much more openness now between parents and children who are donor conceived, and there are mechanisms in place for clinic donors to be contacted in later life.
But does the openness necessarily lead to or guarantee to children not being unsettled?
I think it removes some of those issues that Christine has talked about, very compellingly about secrecy and the damage that can do. And parents are kind of widely counselled now that the best policy is to be open with their children from the beginning. And my experience, and it's personal experience as well as professional experience, is that, children adjust very well, provided that they are talked to honestly and openly, and that, having relationships with people who are, involved in their conception in some way can be an incredibly positive experience and an enriching one. But it does depend on how things are handled and making sure that everybody is honest and open and things are communicated well.
Okay. Thank you very much.